Yotele, ayo, yotele. Yotele, yotele, why, oh, yotele. Yotele, yotele, ayo, yotele. Welcome, my friends. Realiste. Wado anitai. Thank you for your witness. It is the solar season of Cancer in Western astrology. But in the mathematical innovations of expansion, that's tropical Western astrology, that incongruent sense, can be expanded in indigenous astrology into Cancer as an understanding of the snake tooth, the rattlesnake tooth, or poison and medicine, or death, mikitsu, among the various entities associated with it. The interesting thing as well is in Egyptian astrology, Cancer season marks the flooding of the Nile, which marked so much of, not industrialization, but planting, of growing, of cultivation in so many ways. And there's a lot going on in the next 4 weeks or so, um, just ahead of us in, Cancer season and what it will carry forward into the following seasons. Let alone the many retrogrades that are going to be upon us. And so, first, we will get into the translation. We will read from Turkey Astrology by Raven Hale, Rest in Power Love, and see what threads we can pull for a more defined tapestry in weaving. And so, yes, Cancer is a water sign. Um, More so, it would be sort of a negative entropy or void or creative space, but I think often that leads people to feel so consumed by their emotions or utterly empty. And this is, sort of the binary, flattened two-dimensional perspective of pleasurable or unpleasurable, desire or undesirable, and the ways in which we fluctuate in between, which can be very intense, which is maybe also why Western Cancer is a sign that is very common amongst serial killers, but also deeply passionate and deeply feeling and highly sensitive people. However, because of the ways that Western astrology sort of fractions and fragments these understandings, I find that that's where people fail to trust themselves or misunderstand themselves. And 100% why, in my experience, is I trust their energies less. Not Cancer per se, but Western astrology. When people like fully identify, when their identity is consumed by these fragments, really, and without seeing the scope beyond, which is also why I'm here, so that we can expand our awareness and perhaps really bring some resolve to the dissonance that we feel in the ways in which we are, boxed in by Western astrology, or the ways in which it sort of cuts out the peripheral energy and what we can really move or expand into. And so, yes, very much a servant or an identifier of the moon and the ways in which the moon flows. Even within tarot, the moon card will have a crustacean of some sort on it, often, be it a crab or some sort of sea creature, to illuminate the association and the relationship that the moon has to Cancer. And so ironic that we're reading a solar sign season, but I think much of this will fuel the ways in which we resonate with the moon and with all that is coming with Venus and with Mars. We will square off toward the end of the month, even. Um, that again will illuminate that relationship that occurs, yes, in relation, but also in relationship to the self within Venus and Mars energies. If you've been here before, you've heard me say that do away with just reading your sun, your moon, and your rising, especially if you're using tropical Western astrology. Um, but if you look to your Venus and your Mars in those charts, then you get a little bit more insight into why you will see the things you will see in Vedic astrology, let alone in indigenous astrology, and how that relationship uh, affects flow and affects movement in the ways in which we progress within ourselves and beyond ourselves. And so Cancer as a void of entropy, as water, yes, but also deeply innervated into a southern root of flame, into a southern root of the root of the fire, the hottest point of the fire. And ultimately, I think, where that flowing comes from, like what is the source of the water. And if you think like hot springs or magma underneath a volcano or underneath the layers of the earth, there is still water in the shelves of the earth's layers, but it is very heated. And so again, fricative states and dealing with impulse or dealing with emotions, when we understand the associations and the memories of them and where they actually come from, when we are able to excavate all of the layers of projection, of assumption, of previous identity, because we are growing things, then we're able to more deeply understand the what's, not just the what's, but the whys and the hows of who we are and who we intend to be, or why we react or interact in the ways that we do. So Cancer is quite interesting and perhaps quite volatile in just reading it Western wise, because it is fire and water. And that seems very contradictory, but it in fact is not. It is a dichotomy, it is a paradox, whereas contradiction uh, finds itself extinguished at the limits. A paradox can expand in all directions. Um, and elevate either side of it, like contrasting colors, not necessarily tones that cancel each other out, which is often the perspective that we're sort of uh, led to see with in Western astrology. And so, in indigenous astrology, and like I said, and have said before, indigenous astrology and the calendar that I devised in the Seers Codex can directly overlay with, uh, more traditional Gaelic astrology or with ancient Egyptian astrology. And so there's much more congruence and much more harmony to be found, rather than the oppositions and the frictionary states of the fragments that we are given in Western occult astrology. And so, Cancer as water and Cancer as fire is the snake tooth, the rattlesnake tooth, and the relationship that we have, again, binary medicine poison. What is it that they always say? The difference between medicine and poison is in the dose. And when we are blinded to that metric because it has been fragmented, broken, distorted in Western astrology, then we struggle to see beyond ourselves. And I think that's very much why emotions in Cancer can be so consuming, and why so much rain has blessed us with the opportunity and permission to feel deeply. And while that may not be a comfortable state, it is a state of great innervation. Much like, again, when the Nile floods, it feeds so much more than just itself, and it opens up doors and opportunities for growth. And so consider that in your nervous system and the ways in which your nervous system finds safety and the ways in which your nervous system finds relief. Um, not just either with the concept of death, but Mikitsli and the various gods of death in Toltec astrology or Meshika astrology very much has to do with reflection. Much like the moon reflects the sun, much like um, water reflects the sky and the stars and sort of blurs those boundaries in between. What we consider inevitable can actually be what we consider inevitable is maybe more of a distortion of potentiality and possibility, like a constraint on that charge. And in death, considering, yes, we all do have our finality, our mortality, but what we consider inevitable is never the final result of things. Much like you also maybe have heard that death is just the beginning of a new life, of a new transcendence, much like many ancient and ancestral and indigenous cultures had various different practices to to sit with death, to honor death, rather than to fear it, or rather than to preserve what we believed to be life. And something that I notice very much in modern Western culture is, this the obsession with preservation of youth or preservation of innocence, which is again very much ruled in or very much a characteristic of the southern point on the medicine wheel of the southern flame. The hottest point of the flame is also our inner spark, is also, our deepest, rooted desire, which is, creativity, unadulterated, unscathed, very, very Peter Pan, unscathed by adulthood. And the ways in which we can still see innocence and the loss of innocence not as an inevitability, but something that is regenerative, and the ways in which we can create with the current paradigm. Or even the death card in tarot, uh, we can take it literally and at face value and assume death as it is, or we can see the great sunrise in the back, or view that scythe as a tool to cut away what is no longer serving us and to allow new growth, much like pruning for new life. And so we're going to be given many of these opportunities. It may not feel like the most comfortable opportunity with retrogrades coming, but it is going to be something that assists us in our glow and our eminence. Should we be open to that opportunity? Um, Even within Mikitsli and the various death deities associated with it, um, the feminine being, open jawed and consuming of the stars, but not so much consuming because in the Western world that means something very different. More so the reflection of the stars within us, more so the capacity for brightness and eminence that comes out of the depths of our void, where the void is not something to fear, is not an emptiness, but is a space of grand creation, of potential, which is a very full and potent thing, not an empty thing, not a lacking thing. Um, and adornment in the masculine side of the crown, of the ways in which we're able to see beyond ourselves, outside of ourselves, see with an inner sight, see with an inner vision, which again I think very much goes back to our inner capacity to create, and creating from unadulterated innocence, without judgment, without preconceived notion or preconception or assumption. Much like we do the older and more jaded that we get in comparison and in compulsion. And not just that, but even in perhaps a more somewhat modern context in Santeria, and the idea of Santa Muerte is not just death. It is not just this dead woman entity that is so spooky. It is more so related to ideas of healing and ideas of protection and ideas of well-being and assurance, which I do think that again with these retrogrades and Venus and Mars squaring later on, let alone everything in between, that assurance is something that is not going to come from outside, and in fact that will be more of an obstacle. But when we have great awareness of self and potential, when we have an expansive creativity to possibility, not just in toxic optimism or toxic positivity, but in being able to see that there are many doors waiting to be opened by your perception and by your perspective and what you can conjure in that, um, rather than just to see things at face value. Or God, what did I hear recently? That pessimism is thinking like things could be, or things that things are at face value their absolute worst, and optimism is knowing that they could be much worse. And so, you're able to choose which story you want to resonate with because of its potentiality, because of its possibility. Yes, beautiful. In perfect alignment. Thank you for being here. um thank you for being here. Wando Aniktahi. Thank you for your witness, and I hope that this resonates deeply and serves you well in the moving. We will go through all signs, but we will start with Cancer, and we will start with a reading from this book so that we get a bigger idea, and a more full, bodacious, voluptuous idea of these energies. And absolutely consider the roles that Santa Muerte can play, beyond the fearfulness, beyond the, obfuscation, beyond the, typical Western aversion to what that symbolism actually means. The ways in which it has been described by Western ideology is very much a disservice to the full potent energy of what that energy, of what that entity can offer, can bless, can bring, can facilitate in our lives. And so, fear not just death, but the bones in our body, stripped of all of the superficial layers, because the bones feel and resonate and are deeply innervated into our nervous system as well. Which is why the expression of feeling it in our bones is not just, old wives' tales to be written off. It is something that is very, anatomically true, that is very physiologically true. And if you were able to catch my common clearing and invocation for readings, I was actually gifted very recently genuine rib bones, that were ethically found by a kind person that hikes and adores, and offered them to me. Lucky me. Okay. Nikitsli, Santa Muerte, rattlesnake tooth. The rattlesnake tooth, my friend. Kanoka, south. What did I say? Southern fire, but also innocence, green grass, healing herbs, living with, it says living with compromise, but something that I always say is the compromise is hierarchy. Compromise is a vertical understanding. When we work within an expansive, in all directions paradigm, much like the James Webb Telescope has understood it, of the universe's expansion and conception, then it is much like in art. You don't compromise, but you do collaborate. And I think that's something that's very, very true in any relationship, but also in, very literally in art and creation. But are we not creating art with our loves and with our relationships in some sort of way, shape, or form? Collaboration is where neither party sacrifices themselves to see themselves illuminated and see the other just as illuminated. This is something that I think Western society struggles with, because there's so much comparison over compersion, that there's this, and colonialism itself is like, I must extinguish this in order for my flame to be brighter. I must extinguish this flame in order for my flame to be brighter. And in a very real way, is that not what every colonial genocide has been? an extinguishing of a very primordial and potent flame, so as to elicit the only illumination is the Western world, is the civilized world, is polite society, when in actuality that industrialization has really not um, facilitated growth as much as it has insanity, as much as it has exhaustion. And if you read my paper attached to the Seers Codex, this is exactly why we expand beyond the 12 signs of Western astrology, because it mathematically would delineate into repeating fractal integers, which would behave more like an internal vortex spiraling inward rather than expansion. And so Western occultism is defined by secrecy, by mind, by ego, and too much mind without heart and spirit integration or breath integration, much like the three bodily powers in Vedic sciences as well as in Toltec sciences and reverences of these energies, um, is a great severance of potentiality and of grand capacity. Um, the balance of life and death and the guardian of the way. Um, Consider also the ways in which so many ancestral societies, offered to the river, or again, with the flooding of the Nile, marking a capacity for creation, the river or the waters of the flow, Cancer, as a guardian of the way, as an illuminator of the way. However, that does not mean that it is the only way. The river flows through many through many terrains and in many directions, and it connects. It always connects, especially where I'm located. Chicago siphons off water from all of the Great Lakes and then redirected the river. So all of our water goes off into the Chicago River and into the Mississippi River and down into the Gulf of Mexico, and then thus touches every body of water in the world. It is something unique to this location that I am often called to in reverence and in balancing, which is why I do the micromediation work that I do. Um, Symbol caduceus. Color white, stone, ivory, element fire. Hey, what did I say? Fire and water. Interesting to me always, and always exciting to me how in expanding these ideas, it's always almost like the antipode or what would seem to be the antithesis to Western astrology. When Western astrology or Western society, colonialism, capitalism is an inversion of truth. Um, this is also what I mean when I say simulation, because before the technological age, before advancements in AI and what have you, the definition of a simulation was an inversion of information. Like a movie set is a simulation, and is an inversion in the sense that it is a fake reality versus a real reality. But in so many ways, the value systems, the material understandings are an inversion of actual documented truth. The more that you read into religious texts, even, is an inversion of what the original translations or Greek translations actually intended to mean. Um, Flower, silver bells, beautiful. Again, reflection or sound or resonance, because water responds to sound and frequency. It retains that information, remembers that information, even much like our nervous system does, and the viscous bag of fluid that our body really is, um, despite its bones, which are actually much more spongy and full of fluid than they are just rigid. Um, and herb sweetgrass, which is the ways in which all of these things innervate, tie together, collaborate, not compromise. Um, if you consider the ways in which you prepare sweetgrass, to braid it, to braid the hair, even as a reverence to unity of all energies, of mind, of heart, and of diaphragmatic, guttural beginnings or roots of breath and the ways in which these things weave together. Again, inversion or simulated information. The book of Genesis is absolutely designed to covert this information, and is more so an allegory to the severance of intuition and intelligence. Because if you separate yourself at the rib, then you lose the diaphragm in the breath. And so we get panic, we get very much stuck, we get, stuck in fight or flight, stuck in an overwhelmed nervous system, stuck in an overwhelmed mind, which was absolutely a pivotal understanding to sow control of a population. That's why that story exists, much like the Iliad or the Odyssey. Um, in in the ways that it understands consciousness as outside of itself, in the ways in which it allows consciousness to be an outside authority rather than something more deeply intertwined. Again, the open jaw of the stars reflected in us is our understanding of how we reflect the world around us and the cosmos in so many ways. This is also many an indigenous conception story that we are of the stars. Anianokse, we are people of the stars, and that is the first hologram, that we are reflections of that which we come from. We are reflections of the earth around us. Um, and this has so much to do with our inner capacity, our deepest inner capacity, the nerves that uh, feed eyesight from the inside out and imagination, uh, in the ways in which we open up doors of perception. And so, in the signature of Rattlesnake Tooth, in the sky is the rainbow. It is a delicate display of the electromagnetic rays of the sun, separated into 7 basic colors. Technically not separated. A prism is something that does not know distinct boundaries between these colors, but does blur those lines. It synthesizes. A rainbow is a synthesis of all of these colors from darkness to light, not a separation or a distinction. Um, Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. Daylight is white, a carousel of all colors. Night is black, the absence of color. Sun and moon, day and night, physical and spiritual, come together to display the glory of the heavens, or the glory of light and its expansive, illuminating powers, and defined by the shadows, because again, there is no distinction, or no distinct severance. If you've ever watched a sunrise or a sunset, the sky even is not just segregated, split in two. There's a blurring of the lines, much like the ways in which we prepare ourselves for sleep will also fuel the ways in which we rise and wake. Raindrops project this illusion onto the horizon. Water is the vital fluid, the great healer of all life. Rattlesnake tooth is the natal day sign of the medicine woman or man, the shaman, the priest, the healer, and also the sorcerer. The medicine man wore a fur cap with buffalo horns sticking up at the top. He used a terrapin shell to hold the herbs, drums, rattles, gourd dippers, and grass stems as tools of the trade, beads to diagnose and to predict the future of the patient. The OC or hothouse was in Native American hospital. And there are songs for each of these tools, to incite consciousness in the moment and to incite relationship between your relation to the material and the metaphysical, or the material and the spiritual. um, Something interesting to me as well is how much honor and reverence exists with these horned entities, even deer energies within the cycle of harmonies in the Seers Codex. Um, Conversely, Western ideas of horned beings is often one of fearfulness and of control. um, often one of great misunderstanding. And this is, I think, why Aries can be so misunderstood and so misunderstanding of itself and its intensity for lack of integrity. Um, but the more we know, the more we know. The more we know, the more we can direct rather than fear the sharp edges of our own horns. The fang of a rattlesnake, prepared with proper prayers, was used to brush or scarify a person's skin before applying herbal preparations. There are songs for this as well, in piercing or in scratching the surface of the skin as a tattoo, as a letting, as a relief, as a healing. The person of this sign is a stoic individualist, slow to anger, courteous, displaying a serene countenance, no matter what turbulence is boiling around below the surface. Gosh, I don't know any Western Cancer that would resonate with that, but I think that's because, again, if the peripherals are cut off, then yes, there's a panic when we can't see uh, the totality of ourselves. But perhaps in this understanding, we're more able to resonate with the steady pace of emotions expansion rather than that fricative nature. Underneath this glossy veneer lies the kernel of discontent. Conflicting drives of compromise and rebellion wage a storm back and forth between demands of society and desire to proclaim the indisputable verities of life. The indisputable verities of life. Um, Society's demands for us to stay stick skinny, to stay looking prepubescent forever, when in fact the grays and the wrinkles are the maps of our life, for instance. Enclosed within this protective outer shell is the heart of a fragile flower. This person is usually very touchy and easily hurt, susceptible to cuts and bruises, both physical and mental. Interesting because Pisces also would innervate into a flower. So we've got, again, the triptych of watery energies in Western astrology. And, like any flower, uh, its beauty is incomparable, but it is not something that we can encase in glass or stone and keep forever. For sure, I guess people like put it in resin, right? Um, but that very much dulls the frequency output of it. And the most potent part of herbal medicine, or even, fruits and vegetables in their healthiest state, the ripest state, is a state right before death, right before it starts to go brittle and wither and decay. And so rather than fear that experience, we understand its cyclical nature so that we can honor and revere even the parts that we are most fearful of. This person is usually very touchy and easily hurt, susceptible to cuts and bruises, both physical and mental. Repression of emotional stress eventually leads to various temporary illnesses, which are recurrent but not necessarily life threatening, cyclical, habitual, even. The darkening land of the West and the psychic secrets of individual personalities hold a fascination for this sign, a profession that entails the exploration of these dark caverns of the cosmos would fulfill a basic need and help to save a fertile mind from self destruction. Mm, but that southern root, like the basic needs of our most innocent self, is very unlike the needs that we confuse with, high society, modern society, civilized society. Oftentimes, like the things we need, what we think we need as adults, is like a retaliation to basic needs that weren't met as children, in the ways in which we engage in intimacy or relationships, but also the ways in which we engage in material excess. Because the child could make, when we were children, we could make fun and play and imagination out of the simplest of things. But the older we get, the more Western society colonizes our hearts, we lose touch with that. And so, gosh, I hope that this sparks that all over again for so many of you. Um, there's a very practical side to this mentality, combined with a strong investigative instinct, a desire to get to the bottom of things. They are problem solvers, good at details, prone to deliberation, making firm decisions, and giving applicable and practical commands. They make good engineers, architects, research scientists, philosophers, and mathematicians. Performing is a good career choice, for they are in rapport with the audience. Oh gosh, I can imagine just teeming and flowing over. Those born of this sign usually achieve success and popularity because they are conservative and practical. Um, mm, interesting. I read a study once that like success in IQs, right? Success in intelligence. And what the study essentially concluded was that people with higher IQs weren't necessarily put in higher positions within the office. And most often the opposite was true, that lower IQ intelligence was more elevated into managerial or higher positionings. And when they screened CEOs and higher management of what they essentially look for in promotions, it was essentially their likability and their amicableness, like how much of followers they were. And this is the funny obfuscation about what it really means to succeed in a colonial society, because it has more to do with blind loyalty than it does your actual skill set. And like many people will say, to be well read or to be informed is to be enraged. And studies also show that more educated people are more people open to information also often suffer from depression more, because the truth in a colonial world heartbreaking um is heartbreaking. And so in a very real way, I think a big aim of mine in decolonizing what we understand of Western astrology or Western occultism is to piece that heart back together so that we can see fully ourselves and the potential in the world again, and redefine success even so that it is not blind loyalty, and how amicable we are, how eager to please even, because it's like a gang. It's like the military even, or politics in so many ways. They or the academic system, school systems. It is not designed to create free thinkers or critical thinkers. It is designed to create prisoners or workers. This is a very practical side to this mentality. Combined with a strong investigative instinct, a desire to get to the bottom of things, they are problem solvers, good at details, prone to deliberation, making firm decisions, and giving applicable and practical commands. They make good engineers. Oh, I read that part. Da da da. Performing is a good career. I read that part. Those born of this sign usually achieve success and popularity because they are conservative and practical, yet ready to make a pitch for any worthy cause. Ambitious and willing to work and wait to get to the top of the ladder. They are indeed competitive, but go to great lengths to avoid direct confrontation. Careful not to upset the apple cart. Hmm. Yeah, to avoid direct confrontation. A fear of friction, let alone like with other people, let alone within the self. And that eager to please, bosses, reward and make success to people that are so eager to please them and not go against them. This is also why I don't function well in those systems, because I'm very much a person that offers a new perspective. I'm very much the person that offers a perspective that's perhaps, perhaps the room is most blind to, and that tends to make some people very unhappy, make some people very uncomfortable. Um, Here is a demonstration of a basic Cherokee philosophy. We are going to have peace and quiet, even if we have to knock a few heads together to get it. The old time Cherokee priestess and priest was a direct line of communication between the people and the Great Spirit. Sacred smoke was blown to the seven directions to create a protective shield against evil spirits. Tobacco, absolutely, is a reverence, let alone, um, cedar or sage or sweetgrass, which also has a relationship to the seasons. This is something that I denote in the Seers Codex as well. Um, and smoke from the open fire carried messages straight up to heaven. Yes, Anitoshke, this is how the spirits pass. The rattles, oil, and flesh of the rattlesnake were occult ceremonial objects. Priests used them as resonant fundaments to interpret oracles, communion with ancestors, spirits, and other worldlies. Silver bells is an appropriate flower. The Cherokee word for the physical rattlesnake is utsanate. He has a bell, directly translated as in reference to the rattle at the end of its tail. Interesting, interesting. Because the serpent is a entity that transcends modality, and that much like can be in water or land, and burrows and tunnels, and feels so deeply in the entirety of its body without hands or feet. Um, it definitely weaves together multiple ancestral modalities. And something that I noticed in overlaying Telegi or Mexica astrology is there are a few animals that almost mirror each other and at the perfect angle, at a golden angle, showing harmony within these ideologies, showing harmony within these modalities, and these depictions. Whereas, again, in Western astrology, it has to be inverted entirely to be able to attempt to overlay or attempt to uh, somewhat innervate. The herb sweetgrass has been used throughout the temperate zones as a medicinal from time immemorial. It is the American bulrush, which provides a haven for the mythical infant hero whose very life is endangered, like the biblical Moses and the Egyptian Horus, who were floated in reed baskets through the rushes to eternal life in the legends. The serpent and the reed often very much go together as well, in their innervations. The reed was also part of Gemini, um, through the rushes to eternal life in the legends. Disease is a state of being out of balance. Healing is the bringing back into balance, resolve, of the human spirit with the great spirit. This sign is a receptacle to receive the vibrations of the universe, a chalice to contain the holy healing waters, the guardian of the way of life and death and of rebirth. The supersensitivity of persons of this sign, which can lead to intermittent ailments, is the self same sensitivity that makes them appear to be prescient. Careful observation reveals that this so called psychic sense is due more to paying close attention and having concern for the feelings of others than to any supernatural agent. True paranormal activity is governed by laws of physics that have not yet been discovered by man. I just want to add for a second here, that, though people very much revere, readers or psychics or what have you, I do think at a base tone, in a very, southern rooted way, that we all have this potentiality, that we all are capable of this deep feeling and of this deep knowing, and that, simple observance, simple introspection, or like meditation as an interoceptive exercise, even within lucid dreaming practice, your capacity to both perceive more distant beyond you and also more deeply within you is how we can sort of build this flow into that state. And obviously, in the go, go, go of capitalism and in colonialism, that is something that is severely distorted and, if anything, drawn farther and farther away from us. Again, the story of Genesis, separation of the intuition and the mind, or separation of the heart and the root, essentially. Um, with that being said, especially because of so much that is going on in the world, in the ways and in the ways in which Venus will square Mars later on in July. Um, Something that I have come to understand is that it's not that men themselves are evil or terrifying, but that I think the most disturbing thing about your modern average cis male, let alone affluent or white, um, is that because we all have this capacity to feel and to empathize and to read thought form and frequency, we've all been in some room where we can cut tension with a knife or where we can tell somebody's watching us or what have you. Um, we all have that capacity. But colonialism as a system, as a school of thought, as a teaching, has raised, again, your average affluent male to override that natural programming to such a degree that they are void of capacity to be interoceptive of their own feelings, repression, suppression. This is something religion very much absolutely capitalizes on as well, or the military very much capitalizes on as well. Um, that they override our natural abilities. They've been taught to do away with our natural root and override that system, with a new system altogether, which is not to listen or to observe or to feel, but to take and take at all costs and take despite all casualties. And that is a disturbing thing. A person of this sign is inclined to keep his eyes and ears open and his big mouth shut. Interesting. Because everybody thinks they open their heart chakra and now they're working on opening their throat chakra. When in reality, like, are you aware of the space behind your heart, of the space beneath your heart? Because there are much more than seven chakras, and the heart has many layers and is a vortex all its own. Um, I would argue that there's at least nine chakras, in that direct channel, and the heart chakra itself has a mitigating chakra beneath it as a sort of cyclical, regenerative, like sifting of energy before it ever actually reaches the throat, which is why so many people run their goddamn mouths. Don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But the heart expands horizontally, as well as has a southern node before it reaches the throat, and the throat itself also has a chakra that synthesizes information as well, let alone three chakras in the roof of the mouth that help us to more deeply embody a sense of pleasure or a sense of desire, before it gets to direct material, literal mind sight, which isn't even what the crown or third eye chakra is about, but colonialism. Am I right? Um, a keeper of the keys of the secret kingdom. Rattlesnake Tooth is the sign of one who reaches out for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, who seeks buried treasure in the mountain fastness, who probes the shadows of the mystic valley, probes the shadows, probes the shadows. We are going to need that as time progresses. Um, And quite honestly, I hope that knowing that probing the shadows is an option maybe even relieves some tensions about uh, planetary alignments that have already passed us with oppositions to Lilith even, or the ways in which Venus has moved and the ways in which Mercury will retrograde. Um, and like I said in the last moon reading, a severance of information in between those entities and that conversation. But check out that moon reading. I'm not going to go too deep into that here. Um, Da, 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 da. Modern day knights errant in search of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is within us. The Philosopher's Stone is within you. Western occultism is on a wild goose chase for something that is really just deep within themselves. A queen, Boadicea, defending the homeland, who all along the way is looking for the path of happiness, which is this is the white path of happiness, which is not colonialism, is white buffalo, is purity, is new paradigm, is the regeneration that is possible in northern energies that give back rather than hoard. I do have a class all about the expanse of chakras beyond the colonialized and diluted appropriations within the seven. If you go to mytotemodification.com, then that course of action and in asana is decolonize your mind. The shadow dance of the rattlesnake tooth. History reveals that outstanding visionaries of the past were declared by their contemporaries to be disturbed, crazy, evil, or at best simple minded. There is a tendency to dump all persons who are different into a category of wicked witch. Oh my, do I know that very, very well. Socrates was served hemlock, Joan of Arc burnt at the stake by her own people, those she sought to save. It is important to maintain a balance in all areas of life. Neither saint nor sinner be. Holding emotional stress inside can be very destructive. It is necessary to have a safety valve for strong feelings, or they will explode. We all are sold the idea of relief, but never given the opportunity for release. And the two things are very much hand in hand, if not synonymous. Release will lead to relief, but without it is false advertising. And this is also the ills of the wellness industry, selling you compartmentalization and numbness or blindness rather than embodiment, rather than a deeper notion of interoception and your proprioception because of. Talking with friends is a good idea. Not the best. Talk therapy doesn't get us far. Physical activities, walking, jogging, team sports, yes, embodiment, movement, fluidity, flow, often, and more so one that gives rise to safety, rather than the rigidity of, like all pain, no gain. Um, and the forcefulness of so many physical activities. Even bringing mindfulness to lifting weights is something as simple as breath control, to where your nervous system is able to understand and regulate safety, or understand, what is safety and be able to regulate and mitigate with you as you progress in whatever it is. Um, these are all good to ease internal pressure. Exactly. Pressure to relieve pressure. The magician who channels the sleight of hand artistry into entertainment for an audience has found a healthy outlet, so long as he does not fool himself into thinking his act is for real. So long as you do not identify and close all doors because of that identification. Um, Western astrology tends to have this, aversion or a sense of avoidance to that which is its antipode or that which is its opposite. an avoidance of energies that we don't like or energies that we don't have planets in. When in actuality, those are fertile fields of opportunity and of energy that also needs to be integrated. Which is why I also say for these kinds of readings, oftentimes people will look to their sun sign or their moon sign or their rising. Um, I think that's useless. Uh, quite honestly, I think is such a small fragment of information and is more obfuscating than anything. Um, and will really only lead you to the mind, to the ego, and to obsession or to madness. But if you understand the relationship between your Venus and Mars, if you're going to look at a Western astrology chart, then that will give you more direction into the flow of these energies. And beyond that, to understand the totality of all of them. If you're going to look at your sun sign, what's the opposition of that? If you're going to look at, your rising sign, what's the opposition of that? What is that axis? What is that relationship? Um, what I always say is Western astrology will lead you to the mind and the ego, but to insanity. Vedic astrology will lead you to the heart, and indigenous astrology will lead you to the earth, to the spirit, and back again. There's a meditation that I have in my meditation library on my website too, where it says neither saint nor sinner be, um, because of the compartmentalization of colonialism. But we tend to identify with only one or the other. This is again the great misunderstanding that exists within Western appropriations of Gemini energy, which has its own solar cycle of harmonies as well. That is on my video history. Um, but if you consider like a battery, it has a positive end, it has a negative end. And oftentimes because of, compartmentalization or, toxic love and light, fucking new age psyop bullshit, we see the positive and, that's what we identify as, it's the sun, it's da 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 da. It's the ego. We fully identify with it and nothing else exists. And we close possibility. And so the negative becomes a shadow that lingers, a shadow that chases, a shadow that becomes more and more, that we become more and more fearful of, when in actuality, um, it is not that you are all negative either. You are not this, you are not this. Um, a material perspective would suggest that you are the whole of the battery, in which, we have polarity in that. However, but in a non-dual perspective, you are none of the above. You are not positive, you are not negative, you are not the battery or capacitor itself. You are the frequency output of that capacitor, which also requires a direction and an acknowledgement of the resistance to become a more total self. Even within the medicine wheel, it is not just this is your new sun sign and this is your new moon sign. It is understanding the ways in which these energies move through. Yes, where, whatever node you were conceived on, or whatever direction or element you were conceived on, but its relationship to, if you're born in the South, the relationship to the North, and also the ways in which the East and the West carry those notions through. And I understand that's very hard for, colonial mindsets to grasp, but break the compartmentalization, break those chains, get out of that box. It is but a cage. And who's no better at, or who's best at escaping a too small of a box than a snake? All right, my friends, we'll pull some cards for each sign as it goes. Please let me know if the sound gives out and I will adjust. But for those of you that are new or perhaps have not sat with me to read yet, while I do read tarot, I predominantly read in cartomancy, which is in playing cards, particularly for me. Although I often get asked, what is cartomancy? And it very literally is just reading with cards. Tarot is a form of cartomancy. Um, but there's also oracle cards. There's also Lenormand tarot. There's also various other modalities, in which case that would also constitute as cartomancy. So it is not solely playing cards. But in working with playing cards, you do get a very elemental depiction. You do get a very sort of literal embodied depiction. It does very much play with time, often speeding it up even. And the resonant tones of each of the numbers and their numerology or gematria or what have you, very much is a telling relationship within that as well. Often for private general readings, I will read tarot and playing cards together, as a cartomantic duo, because they do communicate. And the way I see it is much like time and space are these, innervating axes. Then we read in time, and the tarot often illustrates those boundaries in a spatial context. But we'll read in time, and allow ourselves to fill that space with our integrity. And so each sign will get a top and a bottom card. Top being the most present energy, is bottom being sort of the zeitgeist or the underlying factor of all of these energies. If you consider like the noun of a sentence and the punctuation of the sentence, or noun of a sentence and the action of a sentence. And so we will start with Cancer, of course, as my gift to you in your season, dear Snake Tooth, dear Death, dear Mikitsli. Something that you perhaps have also noticed with me in reading with me is that it is an opportunity for a breath, and it is something that requires integrative practice, which is why I have the asana activations that I do available in Decolonize Your Mind, Banish the Patriarchy, or Returning to Source Code Breath, which moves through the Hermetic principles in a new, more expansive sight, especially when it comes to ideas of fractal rooting or polarity or gender, even. And so we will take 3 deep breaths together. Is my invitation to you. Take 3 deep breaths together for these pulls. We will do 3 deep breaths for Cancer in respect to Cancer season. And then I will only do 1 breath for each other reading after, so that we aren't sitting here for forever and a day, eh? But after each new moon and full moon reading is the cycle of harmonies breath work activation, where we move through all elements and the medicine wheel. Many of you are already familiar with that. If you have not had the opportunity to do it with me, check out a TikTok live. But also it is recorded in a new moon or full moon reading as an integrative process for all of that information. And consider the elements that arise in these cards even are ways that we can move within that cycle of harmonies and within that medicine wheel. So, if you are ready, my friend, and willing, then in these 3 breaths together, all I ask of you is to open your body to the deepest breath that you can find, and to open your awareness to any sensations that may arise. And much like we are hanging out, because we are, and much like there are cards in between us, because there are, let us begin. Beautiful. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Okay. There's definitely like um okay. There's definitely like something stuck in the throat, lodged in the throat, um preventing communication, suppressing communication, which is very much something we've already talked about. Um and I think can be relieved with our awareness, or opening up the deepest parts of our heart, our ability to expand the heart into how we receive and how we move, rather than just how we project. With that being said, the visual that I'm being given is very much like the distant horizon lines, and like a heat index emanating from that line, that point, in which case maybe even the boundaries that we give ourselves, or the, again, compartmentalizations that we give ourselves, create more pressure and create more resistance that expands. And so the more that we try to, hypercorrect, which is something, very common, especially with people on, their own healing journey directed by Western sensibilities, is to hypercorrect in some way, shape, or form. But that still persists and maintains the binary, that still persists and maintains the same metric, rather than to devise a tertiary solution, a pivot, if you will, even within triangles, like a right angle, rather than just point A and point B. That right angle creates an integrity for transcendence, or for, again, deep introspection and identity. Um, what exists on the horizon? It's an eminence. It's kind of like an explosion. It's a building heat, which, in a positive way, much like I said before too, I hope that this sparks uh, new life. I hope this is a reminder of the deepest part of your flame, and that rather than be overwhelmed with the waves that we associate with Cancer, we're able to see um, the deeper running waters of the earth that is our body, kind of like drilling for wells, even, um, and the resonance that that sound gives off, the resonance that light, or that spark, or that friction gives off, is a powerful thing. Either way, we move it. Um, I think for what is coming, it'll be that resistance will make it be very strong in tension and disquietude. And for embrace will make it very much powerful in its illumination and its expansion. So it's kind of like a splitting too of timeline, not a splitting of self, maybe a schism from what we have known into what can be known instead. Ha 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 ha. Beautiful. King of Hearts, Six of Hearts inverted. This is deep interoception, deep introspection. This is not the monument that we build for reverence from others. This is the home that we create within us, that is safety, that is peace, that is, all of the ways in which we, even prepare the home for spring or summer or what have you, and facilitate grounding within the space that we take up. This is also knowing the truth about your foundation, knowing what your thoughts or emotions come from and where they are most deeply rooted or attached to. Oftentimes, the things we struggle with within ourselves are some program or framework that was given to us, not that we were able to conjure for ourselves. Um, in so many ways, like religious indoctrination, colonial indoctrination. Just because you have not seen something else before does not mean that that is all that there is. And this is, to kind of go back to the beginning, something that we need to understand about inevitability. Oftentimes, what we perceive as inevitable is more so all that we're willing to entertain. And King of Hearts, also inverted, is that suppression, rejection. What are we willing to entertain? What are we willing to entertain about the self? This is also why we fear, the worst parts of ourselves or the shadows, or why we're, so thin-skinned at projections or perspectives of others, because we take it to be an inevitable truth, when in actuality it is transient, transparent, not nearly as solid built of a framework as we give it credit for. And this is also true of ourselves, and what we're possible of. Just because you've never tried A, B, or C before doesn't mean that you can't be fantastic at it. A lot of us autistic folk know this, where, maybe we have some sort of dyspraxia with some sort of motor skill or what have you, but that doesn't mean that that will never, ever, ever be available to us. That does mean that maybe we find creative ways around it, creative ways through it, or that with consistency and persistence and devotion to self, that we're able to transcend those limitations. Most of the frameworks that we've been given thus far are designed to be limitations. Quite honestly, even when it comes to workforce, and this is a theory that I've had for a while, the idea of E equals MC squared is an identity of a particle in two dimensions, and has already been, expanded in so many ways by useful and modern minds, um, because much like the universe expands in all directions and expands in multiple dimensions. When it comes to the workforce, we're given an EIN number, and that is the said company or whatever higher ups EIN number. And so our identity within the workforce is based on somebody else's identity, their EIN. Um, when you are able to entertain doing something unlike what you've done before for yourself, then you create a new framework where now, you create a business or a nonprofit or something, and you're given an EIN number, to register with the government or what have you for tax purposes, or non-tax purposes. And that in and of itself becomes an entirely new framework of identity, in which case your potential for acceleration, your potential for growth, now has an entirely new set of boundaries, of expanded boundaries, really. And so consider that in the most particle driven sense, in the ways in which we identify. Do we identify with a particle in only two dimensions, or are we willing to see ourselves expand beyond those flattened dimensions, beyond that two-dimensional perspective, like a paper doll, let alone a doll with an essence? Which very literally, like porcelain dolls, the hollowness of dolls is so that it can house a spirit. Paper dolls are fun, but even they have layers. Even they have layers. Um, and realistically, those layers are often not of our choosing anyway. Um, Consider what would happen if you breathe life into that two-dimensional representation of yourself, to see yourself in 3D and 4D and then some. This is a very watery breath. This is the ways in which we move stagnant energy, move blood flow, move lymph flow, move tension, and relieve the body of all the density that it holds on to, so as to find genuine relief and so as to create room for the new, room for creativity. Like nobody likes creating on a messy desk. We got to create room so that we can then expand in creation. And again, colonial frameworks, very constricting, very constricting. What would life be without the shackles of colonialism, without the collar on us? Even in like X-Men, like 90s X-Men, the bots that hunt them, and the company that hunts them, they have like collars to deactivate their powers, to prevent them from being themselves. This is colonialism. The X-Men was onto some shit. So take off your collar, go for a dip. And even in a more like adult collared sense, within like BDSM community, uh, the idea of ownership that is so attached to it is so silly to me. And it's very telling of where that person is mentally. Whereas it it can mean so much more. As I honor you as part of me, as I honor you and I protect you as an integral part of me, rather than like you are owned because I desperately want slavery back. It's fucked. And so, what are we a slave to? How do we enslave the self? How can we break free? Trust the mind, but not just the mind, trust the heart. Get very familiar with the deepest parts of our heart and allow the nervous system to build that bridge in between. You will find that there's great space for relief and creativity. In yoga, what is it? Pratyahara is like a sense withdrawal rather than be so overrun with the material world and its limitations. What other senses can we expand rather than suppress? And how does that expand the body of, our body of work, our body of thought, our body of feeling? All right, Leo, with so many energies in it now. Venus in Leo, Jupiter moving into Leo. Mercury retrograding in Cancer. Again, these communications, these watery communications. Mercury retrograding in Cancer is going to give you that opportunity to filter the blood, to filter the self hate cycle, to detoxify the body and mind and spirit. Cleanse the waters of memory. All right, Leo, 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 Leo. Leo. I don't know. Eight of Hearts, Ace of Hearts, Ace of Diamonds, Ace of Hearts, Ace of Diamonds. Interesting, especially with Venus already there and Jupiter moving into it. This is Venus already in Leo. This is Jupiter moving into Leo. Ace of Hearts is a calling card, is a note of heart's desire and of integrity with it. This is very much follow your heart, but also, a wish fulfilled, a fulfillment of heart in a great way. And that is, quite honestly, when we're aware of that space, then it's so much easier to find fulfillment or to see possibility, to see open doors, to see opportunity, to see the prosperity and abundance from many directions, with many doors open, with many gates flooded, rather than, just impulse, what impulse might drive in a literal sense. So I love that Venus will be alone in Jupiter for some time. Jupiter eventually moving to Leo will add to whatever we've built in that, right? Let me not get too distracted with the stars. This Ace of Hearts is a grounded root of what fulfills our sense of self and where we find not just excitement, that's novelty, fulfillment, for very literally, like, fulfillment is the the excitement of, I have all that I need. And that's not an excitement of novelty, that's almost like a peaceful ease, like listening to the ocean in a conch shell, and recognizing that the world exists in such a tiny little hollow, and that it is in fact beautiful and valuable. And so are you. You are the hollow, you are the conch shell. The world exists inside of you. Are you listening? Are you listening? And what doors does that open for you? So many, so many. As soon as Jupiter enters Venus, so many opportunities, so many, votes of fulfillment, wishes of fulfillment. But we have to be able to see and be open to those opportunities, or we will continually miss those opportunities, thinking the worst or assuming the worst of us, or, it's like not shooting your shot. But, how many times do we pass people we don't know on the street, and, society feels so lonely as a whole, and yet we fail to interact. We misunderstand interaction even for the literal material sense of intimacy, but unable to actually be intimate with even ourselves, right? And it's like that. Like every stranger we pass on the street is an opportunity for a new friend or a new conversation or a new insight. But so often we like shut ourselves down from that, and then are filled with loneliness or filled with regret, or you know kind of by choice isolated. And yet, rather than acknowledge that that is a choice to not make eye contact, not say hello or whatever, to be rude to a stranger on the street, rather than forgiving and helping, uh, that is a choice. And so we reap what we sow. Kind of like this whole fucking male loneliness epidemic or whatever. It's not because they're fucking lonely, it's because they've made themselves the island of poison. They've made themselves their own empty bed. And now they have to fucking sleep in it. And they're like, but it's your fault, but it's your fault. No, it's absolutely your doing. It is absolutely, uh, a continuation of choices. And for sure, again, going back to, like, it's colonial programming, it's capitalistic programming, it's military brainwashing, it's you know very much all of those things. And so that doesn't put all of the blame on them, but the responsibility is entirely in our choice. That is the only thing that we can control. As born in the same paradigm, look at me, actively able to, read, digest, decolonize, and stay curious and stay open to new information, and not reject possibility. All that to say, the male loneliness epidemic is not real. It is merely an empty bed that they have sown themselves and also shit in and wonder why it fucking stinks. um, Very much watery breath and memory, but also the ways in which we remember our own embodiment, the ways in which we remember our own presence and embodiment. And so ultimately, very much turn to grounding, which can be so humbling as well. You know, grounding's not all just fucking bliss. To see yourself in the world and to see the avenues of connection that exist there. You know, like grounding is an integration. Even the root chakra is far below, and not far, but is outside of the body and below the genital, material genital understandings of it. Um, in which case your root is in relationship to the earth. And that feels your relationship to yourself and to the world. And in colonial Western society, we lack that entirely in appropriation of Vedic sciences and of uh, the chakral bodies. Um, we lack that entirely. And that is the root of loneliness. That is the root of loneliness because we severed ourselves from connection first to the earth, then to ourselves, and of course, with others because there's nothing to connect to. There is potency, there is lots to connect to. It's just a matter of us facilitating that connection humbly and in reverence and responsibility. Okay, Virgo. Whoop! I'm not going to count that. It'll come back if it's meant to be. Hello, my friends. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your witness, and may this resonate deeply in the waters of your body. May it offer a new perspective for even your deepest memories. Whoop! Sorry, I'm full of sound effects today. Go fucking figure. Okay. Queen of Clubs, Two of Hearts. Interesting. Interesting. Because the Virgo energies that are coming upon us in its oppositions to North Node very much is a redirection of pattern. Is a redirection or a sort of like neurosynapse, right? Like we can break those patterns and we can also build new patterns. The direction of desire, the direction of the fire is very much what facilitates those things. The direction of our awareness, of our consciousness, is how we can grow these new relationships very physically, literally, anatomically in our nervous system, in our brain, but also in the ways in which we, clear the brush, clear sites. Oh, that exactly. Clear the brush. There's fucking weeds in here of fucking colonial paradigms and of, self-loathing and of, loneliness undefined and, us being unnecessarily hard on ourselves because of religious indoctrination of guilt and shame and what have you. Clear that brush, burn those dead invasive leaves so that you can give way to new fertile soil that will assist in growing, that will reflect the kind of clarity of state and clean slate that we endeavor to be able to see shine in the mirror's reflection, right? When and very literally, when you look in the mirror, do you see all of your sorrows and all of your burdens and all of the times your heart was broken, or do you see how deeply you've loved? What is it that looks back at you? And I promise you, if it's the prior, the latter is so present. It's just waiting for you to acknowledge it. It's waiting for you to hear it, to see it, to listen. You'll hear it before you see it, much like lightning, a healing thing, those thunder beings. And what do they cause? What do they cause? Fire. Like struck by lightning, Virgo. Um, Venus in Virgo opposes the North Node. And so at some point, again, with all these retrogrades, Venus square Mars, Jupiter and its new movements, Venus triangulating Chiron, or trining Chiron. Um, in so many ways, I think that is where we realize that we're going against the grain, or that we, like leave at the altar. We get pushed into some situation and we realize like, oh shit, this isn't what I want. Fucking jet. Um, in so many ways, I think that thus far we found ourselves sort of leading up to that threshold, and we will find ourselves at a point of having to walk through that door fully clear about what it is we anticipate seeing on the other side, or fully clear about what we see on the other side and knowing that is not the door for us and fucking creating our own shit. Creating something new entirely. This Venus is very this Venus, this fire, and this two of hearts are giving me very like Joan of Arc energy, or like fucking female Yakuza, like the not distortions, but the fluidity of like just how masculine the feminine can be, but without sacrificing the feminine at all. The blurred lines in between those things that are able to reflect more of what we want to see rather than reject it entirely. Because when we reject the fire, it merely scorches, it merely goes unkempt, it merely goes unwatched. Like we can't light a candle and then reject or neglect to observe it, lest it burn down your house. And so we must bring our eyes to that point, and not just for sake of seeing, but in a full bodied awareness. Again, we'll feel it before we see it. Um, Within cycle of harmonies, breathing again, we're moving water with this two of hearts, but it is more so to facilitate a connection. When I think about like cyclical breathing, holotropic breathing, it's the lack of space in between each breath. I don't know who invented fucking box breathing, but I don't fucking buy it. And 100%, I think, for the most part, Western modalities are the appropriations of very ancient breathing techniques, were not designed with our health or healing in mind. And for Western appropriations of very tantric fire breathing, was not designed with fire in mind, was not designed with root fire in mind, was not designed with cultivation of creativity or desire or insight in mind. It was a forceful progression of hyperventilation, which is why so many people reject that now, because it's just done them ill. It's just exacerbated their anxiety and what have you. And so this is cultivating a purifier, a true fire. And that's not listening to some fucking Becky talk about Tantra with her boyfriend. That is a very ancient tantric idea of fire breathing. And then, let me not get too far on this because I'm not going to do it for everybody. But the ways in which we do the cycle of harmonies is fire breath is in through the mouth and out through the nose. Most of tantric or Vedic fire breath is, yes, hyperventilation to some degree because you're breathing like like intensely through the mouth, but it's more so about the depth of your diaphragm and diaphragmatic breathing than it is about the lightheadedness or the rush that we get. And if you consider most modern modalities do that kind of excessive mouth breathing to excess. And so it depletes the blood of oxygen and retains CO2, which is not what we want. Um, Whereas gently rising that energy and finessing it, distilling it, distilling it like a flame to a laser, rather than a forceful flamethrower. But yeah, what I've noticed for sure is like most Western tantric fire breaths are an air breath, so mentality, and to excess, which depletes the energy in the body or outside of the body. When building fire is very much about cultivating a fine sense, a refined sense of energy within the body. So party on. This can also be a lack of focus, especially now that I'm thinking with Virgo, the ways in which they can be kind of controlling and can be kind of, yes, very compartmentalized and organized. Doesn't necessarily mean compartmentalized. The two things are not synonymous. But when they bleed into the other is because it lacks focus or direction. And that's like ADHD times 10. Because there's nothing wrong with ADHD. It's something that can be utilizable, something that can be a strength. But when we find ourselves lacking direction, lacking sense of self, then everything and all things become a part of our desperate need to control rather than to synthesize or embody or find actual resolve or find organization of the many parts of us. And that is ideally Virgo strength rather than the former. Libra, on the brink of life and death, balancing the heart and the mind. Libra, what say you? Down to business, much less irritated. Okay. 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 All right. All right. Bye bye. Three of spades, Jack of clubs inverted. Libra. This actually makes perfect sense because like the other this right before Virgo very much felt like irritable, agitated. And I very much think that that's something we'll be dealing with throughout Cancer season is just how quick to irritation or agitation and what we do with those sensations responsibly or through impulse. Um, Libra is not more relaxed in, but I think more like kind of worn down, exhausted, almost like giving in. And don't. It's easier said than done, right? But like, don't give up on yourself. Understand that for every downhill turn is an uphill swing. Understand that of all you've been through, it has not broken you. You are still here for a reason. And that which has broken you, like heartbreak, the tear in the heart, like any muscle grows stronger. And ancestral lore of the scars or permeations in the body can be a healing thing, can be a very in tune thing. The, the holes are where the light gets in, and the scars are so so deeply feeling of that which the superficial and material mind can't necessarily fully um, grasp without the sensitivity. It is stimulus that is potent and unavoidable despite the level of aversion of avoidance that we often have. Three of spades and jack of clubs. And jack of clubs inverted is like fucking burnt out instead of like having a ball. And the summer is too early on for us to be burnt out and not having a ball. Or feeling invigorated or feeling revolutionary or feeling like we have something to fight for or something to feel or something to speak for, not necessarily in the term of like just speaking, or shouting or what have you, but something to live for, something to die for, somebody that we care enough to speak of, for, and about. Um, Much like we're seeing more and more people talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and like passionately so, because it blows my mind just how much even Americans still don't know about reservation law and no man's land and pipelines and hunting and headhunters and laws that have just recently been repealed about exterminating the Indian, let alone, quite honestly, some Canadians that get high and mighty with me because they're so much better than America, when realistically that only goes to show me that you don't know shit about your own country's fucking history, let alone what they're going through now. But everybody loves the fucking hierarchy. It makes them feel better about themselves. And that is something that I get it. I get it. Libra's exhausted with, because Libra is not hierarchy, Libra is balance. And when you see so many people, desperate for hierarchy and proximity to white supremacy, it gets to be fucking soul crushing. But the soul is much stronger than that. Even that expression, soul crushing, is like, who fucking made that? Because the soul can't be crushed. The soul can't be expunged. It is weightless. It is light. It is everything. And again, we feel it before we see it. This three of spades. This three of spades is intense. It's intense feeling. And it is all of the feeling, not just the positives, not just the good, but it also is alignment. It is integrity. It is a steady flow of growth. And so, patience, my dear, patience and diligence. Continue to show up as your truest self, not just posturing, not just being the silly fun guy or the silly little guy, but also in reverence, preserving that as well, which is so funny because I've had a dream recently where I lost my fucking shit on somebody because they hurt a pet that I had. Um, and I was thinking about it today again, where I was just like, what did I even name that pet? And I'm still thinking about just how much that broke my heart in this dream days ago. And I would just call him little guy. I'd just call him little guy. And just silly little guy. And this, jack of clubs, and this jack energy kind of in general is kind of like jester, like youthful, like young, like spark, right? But the spark is kind of dampened. That dampening is not you. That dampening is not a side of you. That is a paradigm that does not fit. And that is a paradigm that you do not fit in. So do not use that as a metric by which to measure your acceleration or your growth. And allow yourself with patience to sprout like any beautiful flower. And this like loading screen, it can drive us fucking crazy when we're impatient. But if we can maintain grounding in breath, then we are able to find solace in the space in between. And, again, going back to, tantric breathing and Western appropriations and essentially like rushing this along rather than understanding or even when we were talking about chakras, rather than rushing straight through and up, understanding the cyclical toroidal nature of these things expanding in layers farther and farther, within you and without you, within you and beyond you. This is the cultivation of true cerebral spinal fluid. This is the cultivation of true Kundalini energy, in patience and in reverence and in honor, not in exasperation and not in obliteration. Damn. Love you, Libra. Actually, the shirt is a friend of mine who is a fantastic rapper, and like is also Libra. And I can very much see ways in which this has resonated with them in the world. Maddie did that. Check it out on Spotify because he's fucking dope, especially if you're resonating with that feeling. I knew I wore this shirt for a reason. Love you, Maddie. Scorpio, serpent sensibilities. Oh gosh, the Libra was mind fire too. Was clubs and very much inner sense fire, and also the mind and the ways in which it distorts, obfuscates, or distills that energy. The mind fire, the east and west fricative, much like the scales, moving across a horizontal axis. Like the currents of the wind, like the flows of the storms that have been carrying. Okay, Scorpio, 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 Scorpio. Thank you for the likes, y'all. Like I always say, send to a friend, but send to an enemy too, because you know what? Chances are they need this shit more. Or send to somebody who's obsessed with Western astrology and really needs to be humbled by it. But share, share, share. Knowledge. Knowledge is a fertile seed, my friend. I know a lot of our viewers will watch with friends, watch with companions. And I love that. I admire that. And I think that's so beautiful to share that, because these readings can be a very vulnerable place too. So I'm very lucky to know that a lot of those who witness me, and so as to witness themselves, find a sense of safety in that, and therefore find true intimacy and connection. Gosh, even on TikTok, the way everybody greets each other, the way the OGs are showing up for each other, just that's fulfillment. That's fulfillment. All right. Scorpio. Interesting. Eight of diamonds, eight of spades, inverted. Interesting. The eight, which Add together 16, 6 plus 1, 7, which is very much a number rooted in so many creation myths, and also I think a number that very much uh, stems into like ancestral reverence, but also belief. It's not something that we necessarily, again, we feel before we actually see it. And that is where our, not just belief, but our deep knowing of self then transcends and projects into the world in which we see. The eights are also cyclical, not just turn to the side an infinity sign, but rules the mind cycles and the ways in which um, habit or consistency begin to regenerate themselves. I very much have a theory that this is also why fascist fucking Germany used these numbers as a symbol within their own right, not right, within their own bullshit, um, because it was a mode of mind control. They're obsessed with the occult, and with so many rulings of eights, it was about controlling the mind paradigm, controlling sensibilities of the ways in which we see reality. And truly, that's ultimately what they did, what they still do. So, understanding the serpent as it weaves through paradigms. Interesting, because the lines drawn in the sand by these eights are also hollows, or also burrows, in which the serpent and its many sensibilities, its capacity to feel deeply and resonate deeply, like it feels the vibration in the earth. It doesn't have any hands or feet, so it feels. Is also an animal, a reptile that has been studied and shown to have actually had an ocular third eye in the top of its head, much like you can't see it, but much like this painting. That was a vision. But serpents have had legs. Studies show. They have the little bones, the little fucking bones that would catch that socket, but also have a third eye. There's a brilliant YouTube creator that has a great video on this, and the science behind the human or animal third eye is called Anton Petrov. Um, I can't think of what the name of the YouTube channel is, but if you YouTube Anton Petrov, fantastic dude. Love, love, love that channel. I know quite a few of you have probably heard me rave about it already. Um, in which case we're seeing in between the spaces. What exhausted Libra about those definitive spaces is where Scorpio can see the union between those spaces or unite those things in between. Much like I said earlier, too, with the overlay of Telegia and Meshka astrology, the serpent weaves those things together at the perfect divine angle, a golden angle within its cyclical harmonies. Eight of diamonds, very much of earth, eight of spades, very much of mind. So the ways in which we absorb information and not just absorb and become, these are the frameworks that dominate our sensibilities without true knowing of self or without knowledge. But again, that relationship to the earth, when we're able to take in new information and synthesize rather than simply become, then we're able to create a whole new paradigm of sense and sensibility within the self and within the ways that we perceive around us. This is something really beautiful about Scorpio in its own right. For quite honestly, I think is truly misunderstood in dilutions of Western astrology, because most often Scorpios are just like in it for the shock and awe and just trying to be like fucking lame, rather than actual, deep thinkers or deep feelers or deep, interoceptors, deep creators. Um, Granted, that's not necessarily true across the Western board. I feel like if there's usually it's like Scorpio Sun that are like just shock and awe, very vain, very vapid, very superficial. But Scorpio risings, I feel like, are on a voyage of like, but who am I really? And like, how do I bring that to new spaces? And it's beautiful. That is what it's about. Um, and Scorpio moon again can kind of really just be selfish and like, but this is how I feel, and I don't care about how you feel. When in fact there is a unity. Again, starting from the diamonds or earth energy. This is mining and finding diamonds. This is mining and finding quartz. The ways in which the earth regenerates, the ways in which we can tap into that, the ways in which we can find resource and regeneration in that. I've said recently, and I'll say it again, for all of the you know, people at a loss of like, but how do I find my own ancestors, and how do I find information that isn't of a Western context? Look, look, just look around you. Look around you. Go outside and look around you. You are surrounded by other waves, other frequencies, other thought forms of information, and not just in people, not just in tangibility or in material, but in the earth, in the elements, in the ways in which the wind blows. That is an ancestor that communicates with you, very much so. And that is ultimately what any indigenous understanding was about, cultivating your relationship to the elements and to the land. And so, are you open, and can you take in that information and allow your mind, your body, and your breath to synthesize it, and therefore create a new creative vision in the mind, but also space with which to create in that mind. In the cycle of harmonies, when we do an air breath, it is with the intention of clearing the cobwebs out of the skull, so that or even very another mode of breath is skull shining breath. And it is, sort of like polishing the diamond in the rough, that is truly in the mind, that is truly deeper in the mind and in the third eye. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect, because this spades of reverse is deeper than the mind in the third eye, and deeper than the body, but in a synthesis of the two. Damn, love you, Scorpio. Sagittarius. Scorpio also doesn't have to move fast or loud. And that's something that is misunderstood by Venus in Leo. And what Jupiter in Leo will also be misunderstood as. Um, it doesn't have to be fast, loud, big, bold. Bold can come in many forms. It's bold to be yourself, not just to fucking scream about it. Um, Consider how silent snakes can be, and yet still so impactful. Sorry, I know Scorpio is technically the scorpion, um, but in so many innovations, it really is the snake, um, and similar habitat. And realistically, even the scorpion, bioluminescent, silent but deadly. And I think much more in common with cancer, given medicine and poison, than we give it credit for. Sagittarius. Sagittarius. Hello. Hi, how are you? What you've got for me, Sagittarius? This Cancer solar season. Party. 9 of hearts, 6 of diamonds. A little reversal. The water meets the earth. The water permeates the soil. 9 of hearts, maybe fulfillment, excess. The tools that we have to build. And the 6 of diamonds is the ways in which we build with them. Let us not be overwhelmed by our sense of feeling. Let's again allow the body to process that stimulus rather than absorb it and become it, so that we can more responsibly, mindfully cultivate, construct with it. Because the 6 of diamonds is a balance, but balancing in like perfect crops, balancing in like perfect weight, perfect density, um, in a way that does not crumble, or like the sinkholes that happen in the earth, right? Um, or over mining, even, really. Um, the 9 of hearts can be overwhelmed by itself, though, and therefore sort of blinded to the open space that this really can be, or to the potentiality that this really can be. If you consider water and earth, this is overwatering the earth, which will kill your plants. The flooding of the Nile, again, like we talked about in the beginning. However, when we are aware of our water, like very literally, when it comes to watering plants, even, um, the quality of the water matters more than we give it credit for. Watering our own bodies, hydrating our own bodies, the quality of the water matters greatly, more so than the quantity. And that's very much what's going on here. This 9 of hearts is like obsessed with quantity and forgets about quality. And so it becomes toxic to the system, in retaining or in seeking relief in all the wrong ways, right? um, Insatiable, really, unsatisfiable, insatiable, and hard to please. When in actuality, if we, to get back to watering plants, if you sing to your plants while watering them, if you, mantra to the water, or you play with sound bowls over the water, say nice things to the water, and then you offer it to the plants, not in excess, but in just enough to wet the topsoil, then you will see profound growth. And that is where things start to build. That is where you get to see sprouts, like seedlings. You can't water them too much or you'll fucking drown them. And in so many ways, is that exactly what's happening to us, within, or to Sagittarian sensibilities, is excess of knowledge, excess of consumption, that we're not integrating, that we're not able to actually embody. Everybody loves fucking talk about Lilith and worship this and that and da 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 da, but these entities don't even want worship, even when not that I'm into Christianity or anything, but even the again, the hyper correction of Satanism, that they worship the devil. The devil doesn't want your worship. Lucifer never wanted your worship. He wanted your love and your growth and your, you know, capacity to see that well beyond the boundaries of yourself. Um, any demonic entity really only was about sharing of knowledge and companionship and science and art, um, rather than what we all fear, what we all construct them into because of the religious indoctrination and sensibilities. Um, you gotta let go of some shit. You gotta let go of some shit. Maybe that's deep betrayal wounds. Maybe that's like deep doubt within the self. Maybe that's the ways in which we're hyper analytical or hyper uh, uh, perfectionists within the self. You gotta let go of that shit because it's holding you back. And it's ultimately like oversaturating and weighing down progress, which is so funny because isn't Sagittarius like so driven by progress and like seeking outside of itself, but seeking so far outside of itself that it loses sense of relationship with the earth at all. Is like a bow that's too fucking heavy for you, or a top heavy centaur. Can you imagine? Where like it's got like pony legs, like little corgi pony legs, but like dudes all roided up, like shouldered up. Like that's not helpful. That's not helpful to the structure of what you need. There's excess. And really interestingly enough, with Venus squaring Mars later on, like the ways in which they try to outshine each other, like even fucking modern, affluent, fucking mainstream feminism isn't about, or you know, like so many that are like matriarchy, matriarchy, isn't about what it actually was about. Matriarchy was about the future of the children and the weaving together of generation to generation through story and through honor. And realistically, what we have today is just the patriarchy with tits. And it's disappointing, really. And I think more often than not, they don't even see it that way, which I find really disappointing. I find really disappointing. Which is funny because even in this, you know, if femininity is water and, you know, tangible earth is masculine, then this is still driven by hierarchy when it needs to be more about equal dispersion and expansion and and need, you know, the six doesn't need this nine to fit into it. But even when we put those together, we get the glyph of Cancer, right? Because they illuminate each other and they cycle, not because they conquer the other. So, what part of yourself are you trying to conquer? Do away with that. There's no conquering here. And whatever that framework is, whatever that's attached to, whatever fucking notion that is tied to, was not something that you planted. It's something from the fucking system outside of us. And realistically, you can uproot that and use it more wisely without drowning underneath it. Capricorn. Capricorn. Cappy baby. Interesting. Eight of Hearts, Three of Hearts, inverted. That which we seek fulfillment in is not necessarily in alignment with what we truly need. This Three of Hearts inverted is isolation, is hoarding, is the ways in which we hermit away and not out of honor or responsibility, not because of our intellectual clarity or intuitive clarity, but because we are afraid of losing. That is so much of the Capricorn that rules Western sensibilities, that rules colonial sensibilities, because it is invasive for fear of not being enough or not having enough. That is why America starts the wars that it does. So, what is it you really need? What is it that makes you feel fulfilled, grounded? What is it that makes you feel fulfilled and grounded and close to home? What is the smell that brings you peace or ease? Oftentimes, the things that are truer needs or necessities for our growth or our fulfillment are not the tangible terms that we've been dealt. And so, this Three of Hearts is like ghosts with blood, like ghosts circulating in the water, that need you to listen to what your genuine needs are outside of superficiality, outside of what other people are dictating or telling you. And that will happen outside of your analytical or intellectuals, honestly, a generous word to use with that, outside of your analytical or fucking dependency on just the mind or just the sight. And so again, we feel it before we see it. We feel it before we see it. I think you'll have to break the mold a little bit on this one, dear. The mind isn't reliably leading you, but the heart will. When you figure out what exactly it's pumping for. Kind of like again, colonial fucking narcissism is really just insecure as fuck. Even fascism, as it's been studied, really just comes from a fear of death, a fear of annihilation. What are you afraid of? What do you yearn for? That's a different sense of power than I think Capricorn sensibilities are really used to. And so, not submitting for the sake of submitting, not submission for the sake of submission, but how do you redevote, renew your vow to self? How do you redevote yourself to the young version of you that you want to make proud? Kind of like even the parents that are absent, but they offer gifts and these tangible things that do not offer the connection that ultimately the parent is wanted for. Have you done that to yourself, and how can you recalibrate that relationship instead? This is you know is something that, yes, psychology dabbles in, as far as like reparenting the self, or um, going back to versions of the self to offer some wisdom or advice. Um, that very genuinely, I think, recalibrates what is potential in the future, and sort of reacquaints the self with all versions of the self in totality in the present. Check out my third day meditation, actually. You'd probably like that. Because it's a lot of feeling and a lot of water, and I don't think Capricorn's really excited about that. Aquarius. Aquarius. Speaking of Aquarius, we should check the progress of this, actually. Bow, 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 bow. Woohoo! Okay. Time should be gold. Maybe I keep this in case it tells me that it's dying. In case it tells me that it's dying. Aquarius, Aquarius, you misunderstood, motherfucker! How can we illuminate you today? Aquarius, Aquarius. What will you do this Cancer season? Interesting. Oh, hello. Okay. Quality of water, yet again, interestingly enough, even AI data centers require distilled water in the same ways that the human body does to actually integrate and acclimate, penetrate cells, yada, yada, yada. Much like we make baby bottles with distilled water, or we use, distilled water, or, refined oils and what have you, so as not to clunk up the system. The Five of Diamonds is the system, is the center of the system, is the heart of the system, if you will, the capacitor of all things. Aquarius, though deeply misunderstood, I think is very, very aware of either the void or the intensity of the, center of self, of the, the heart of self, of their own. Um, Not just intuition, but awareness, like when you're in a state of psychosis, you either are like completely unaware of it and you don't know what's actually going on, and like maybe family observes, but usually it involves some sort of intervention or hospitalization, so to speak. um but there are people that are very aware and very cognizant of, like, oh, that's my mind not in a great state, that's my um my mind, at odds with me, my mind against me, or like schizophrenics can interact with their hallucinations to discern whether or not it is real or false. That is this Five of Diamonds. The Nine of Hearts that precedes it, interestingly enough, rather than it be the excess that we started with in a prior reading, it is very much the ways in which uh, we release the floodgates and we let energy flow. Um, I feel like that's also like water breaking through dams or the way water can penetrate even concrete. So, despite these data centers and consumption, that water still has a very like powerful role to be played in these circumstances. And I recognize that's like worldly and not necessarily like the identity of Aquarius, right? But as a human, as a person, as somebody embodying or understanding these energies, and Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, um, perhaps we ride tides, ride the river Styx, ride the Nile to the source of information, to the deepest point of our hearts, and not out of fear, and not like whitewater rafting and fucking crazy, but in the most ease of mind that we can find, to be led to the center of self, of all things, rather than, and again, Western sensibilities, I think, greatly misunderstand the capacity that Aquarius has, the understanding of Aquarius in its truest form, that it's almost like water at the source diverted into so many other ideas that it depletes the central point of it, that it depletes the source of this information, depletes the central power, like surge protectors, are designed so as not to fucking blow a fuse, right? But when we divert too much energy into other things because of other people's ideas, projections, requirements, entitlements, what have you, then we do ultimately deplete ourselves of what we can offer to ourselves. Very much a giver, um, but to the nth degree. This is like people pleasing. It's not because, which people pleasing is, quite honestly, like, empaths and narcissists need each other. There's really not that much of a distinction between them. The empath requires the narcissist to validate its identity. The narcissist requires the empath to validate its identity. That's why these things are drawn to each other, because they're very much one and the same. Despite, yes, that empaths are very literally of a feeling variety, and narcissism lacks that typically entirely, or avoids that to the nth degree. Um, a people pleaser, for instance, which is often what self-proclaimed empaths are recovering from, um, is really a selfish desire. Yes, there's nuance to all of this, and sometimes it's the trauma response and complex PTSD, and understanding how to heal that. But even in that, people pleasing became a survival mechanism, and ultimately survival is about you, and for lack of a better term, is a selfish desire. People pleasing, uh, in play, in practice, is often about being able to control the narrative or control perception of you, and that is, again, for lack of a better term, inherently selfish. And so with this Aquarius energy, maybe it's a little time to be selfish for yourself, because reciprocal requires the oscillation of these energies, and not just a need for control and giving, 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 or a need for control and taking, taking, taking. What is the union there? Again, narcissist, empath, control, and control of the narrative, or control of perception, or control of validation. Truly, they are one in the same. And so rather than be strung out at all corners and diluted at the center, we can reverse that flow. We can draw energy toward us, and not to siphon from things, but drawing like sensory information from each individual finger back into the center of the palm, sensory information from the very ends of extraneous limbs, and, all sensory awareness back into the heart and the space beneath the heart. This is perhaps maybe even just a good trick for meditation, to find that space in you again and see what doors that can open in the canals of our minds and of our memories, because the body retains the information. And if the body feels exhausted or lacking, it is not going to lead to fulfillment to continue to uh, please to excess. Pisces, my dear. Dear Pisces, you strange but beautiful Pisces. What have you to say this solar season in fellow water and fire? We meet again. It seems you are drawn to me on the ethers. You know, I haven't had a pizza in a while. If you want to buy me dinner so bad, let's make it happen. The weight of my heart is through my stomach, which is an expression. I don't think it's that simple, but Pisces. Deeply feeling, leaking even. Oh, lovely. Are you going to share? After we are just talking about giving and taking with Aquarius, move to Pisces. Oh, surprise, surprise. Four of clubs, three of spades. Okay. Interesting, interesting. Pisces energies, four of clubs, three of spades. So fire within the circle. And it's transcendence, it's cultivation, it's acceleration beyond, upwards, like we've seen these pictures of like the laser that beams out of the pyramid, or like bat signals, like signals into the night, into the deepest points of the void of oblivion, deepest points in the horizon. Um, that as a like zoning, or like a back signal, like a summons, like a grounding point. Very literally, even the ways in which, like in hiking, like light towers or lighthouses are meant to illuminate like horizon, illuminate designation, illuminate um like that which is coming, that which is beckoning, all in the same. Um, but inverted. So within, what is the lighthouse within? What is the source of light within? What is the horizon? What is the horizon within, or the like land mass, or do we feel lost in the sea and with all directions open and clean? That can be disorienting. But it can also be some of the most exhilarating things ever. It's my favorite part about water, actually, is, beautiful, obviously, during the day, but at night, you lose the distinction line, for the horizon. You lose the distinction between sky and water, and everything becomes this beautiful abyss. And it's a very overwhelming sensory experience, but in the most exhilarating way. That can be found within. That is fulfillment. That is pleasure. That is deep intimacy within self, that then makes your capacity for intimacy outside of you that much stronger. Again, kind of like pratyahara, sensory deprivation, but so as to heighten the other senses outside of the material world. Um, this Three of Spades again um, can also be the heartbreak of memory and the woundings of the mind and of the concept of self that makes this Four of Spades either feel like a very tight, constrained space or a very overwhelmingly a far abyss kind of space. Again, like we talked about with Cancer, even in the negative entropy of the void, as not emptiness, but great capacity for creation. Um, this is something that I think Pisces fears, but I think Pisces is also very strong and capable in understanding. It is maybe its most natural state. Yet, because of commodification and compartmentalization of colonization, has constricted our understanding and our sights of. It also makes me think very much of cultivating a fire within these four corners, much like we do in the cycle of harmony. Is for those of you that have breathed it with me, or that will find it in previous new moon or full moon readings too. Um, we build the fire wide and far, right? So like a campfire. It's very much spread across equal directions, but we finesse it, we distill it into a laser beam, the hottest point at the flame, and is a collection of all of these of all of the hottest molecules into a definitive and defining stream that can cut through anything, that can cut through aversion, that can cut through ignorance, that can cut through false ideals, that can cut through um, misalignments of the self, even. And so I think in a great way, yes, Pisces is a water sign, but or is a water sign in Western commodifications, but there is so much more to his chemical innervations to be had. Pisces also has its own solar sign understandings, so you can watch the beginning parts of that and learn more about how that really expands. Um, but what this is giving me 100% is like cultivating that fire breath. And again, that steady rise of cerebral spinal fluid and of awareness and igniting all nerves in alignment so that we can really open up paradigms, perspectives, and insights. This space between Pisces and Aries, even, or the ways in which other modalities of astrology would sort of position Pisces as the true beginning of the astrological season or what have you, um, or astronomical seasons. Um, I think that is because uh, Ophiuchus exists between all of these states. And for sure, at one point I was like, is it really Aries that is the beginning, or is it Pisces that is the beginning? Or is it, that both of these can be true, but the friction in between is because of ficus creates new paradigms. The tension of these like taut lines in between is again a compartmentalization of a square box to put these things in rather than an expansive fractal understanding. And so while Pisces is, deep waters and in the abyss, it is also our integrity and our fearlessness in it, and our ability to cultivate, even in water, cultivate buoyancy, cultivate bodily awareness, cultivate enough drive to get you from point A to point B, in the abyss of the ocean in the night. It is very cold to be able to cultivate heat within the body so as to um, acclimate to the varying temperature and pressure changes of the depths is again key in Pisces' understanding of self and of where that alignment goes and grows with its own focus. Cultivating fire, cultivating fire, and not in some fucking Western appropriation of tantric breaths. Again, check out the cycle of harmonies that follows any full moon or new moon reading, and pay attention to what your body does in that fire. That is where we cultivate all of our greatest desires and where we obliterate all of our illest illusions. Aries, the beautiful horned being that fails to understand itself by Western commodity. What can we bring you in illumination this Cancer season? This snake season, this death season, this Mikitzli, Santa Muerte season. And yeah, Pisces, hella water, but like again, hella fire, the root of the problem. The root of the problem, the root of the cause of everything. We are living in the effects, in the ripples. What is the root? But Aries, what say you? Oh, oh, hello. Okay. Ah, doesn't surprise me. King of clubs, inverted. Not a king. A dishonorable one. One that doesn't know itself. A king with his head in his ass. Go figure. Doesn't surprise me for Aries. King of clubs, nine of spades. Let me not be too harsh, right? Misidentity of fire. I think Aries can get very caught up in posturing and presenting and, uh, speaking for the sake of hearing themselves or, the superficial identity of impulse. People would often describe Western ideas of Aries as passionate, as so intense, but in reality, it is impulsive. It is impulsive and it lacks concern for that which is around it. More often than not. That is not to say, that there's no such thing as a compassionate Aries. But more often than not, they're driven by impulse because it is the most literal thing to them and it dominates the sensibility. Um, the King of Clubs, inverted, I think, is an excavation of understanding those impulses, of maybe sitting with those impulses for a little bit longer before acting on them so as to understand where they truly come from, kind of in lieu with Pisces as well. But this king-like energy, understanding like, but why? Why do you do this? This is the rules of things, and like with children, again, Aries loves hierarchy, loves that level of dependency, right? Loves people depending on them even. Um, which is funny because I've heard people describe Aries as very giving, but again, from a selfish context because they love to be depended or relied upon, and that has much more to do with them than it does to do with giving to you or helping you in any context. But in this King of Clubs kind of sensibility. The whys, if we can answer the why, then we get that much closer to a true sense of embodiment rather than just following blindly or because I said so or because that's just how I feel or because that's just my level of intensity. I often find Aries has a difficult time explaining themselves because they're so overwhelmed by what they assume about feeling. Because nine of spades, this is mind. This isn't heart. This isn't feeling purely. This is feeling within the construct of regurgitation, because it's not even intelligence, let alone intellect, let alone intuition. Um, but to feel so deeply, to feel so intensely based on the analytical mind rather than a deeper sense of feeling, sensibility, or self. This is where sensation jumps across the medicine wheel into impulse, into action, rather than sensation or stimulus being held in the body, being understood, being allowed to unfurl, being allowed to expand or speak. Like emotions will expand and speak and ask something of you, and then can be more rightly aligned and directed. For instance, your anger and the impulse of something that makes you angry, something that irritates you, and the direct, reactivity or impulse to lash out, to, you know, cut deep, to low blow, to react, to be reactive, rather than to sit with that anger or jealousy or sadness and let it let it unfurl, let it undress itself, let it take its mask off and see what really is underneath. Because most often that anger is, hiding behind a mask uh, so as to hide from its betrayal wounds, or from feeling isolated, or feeling not good enough, or feeling lonely, or what have you. This is why fucking incels act the way that they do. Um, or sadness, even, and the ways in which people will give so much to just the weight of that feeling, rather than to investigate, like, okay, well, what is it that what is it that this sadness is telling me? What does this sadness want from me? Am I holding space for myself? Am I treating myself with kindness? Am I treating myself with patience? And Aries moves, is ruled by Mars, is very quick to move, and can be quite cutting through in that way. But too fast, and with very little direction. And so this king is allowing himself to investigate and to understand why. Like, oh, this is how you do things all the time, Aries? Dope. Why? And if that question pisses you off, it's because you don't know, and you shouldn't be mad at anybody but your fucking self. I see this all the time with adults and kids, where they're like, oh, this fucking kid won't stop asking questions. And it's like, you're just mad because you don't know the answer, and it makes you feel stupid. That has nothing to do with the child. Don't treat the child stupid because you're unaware of why you actually do the things that you do. This is an opportunity for us to get very clear about, and I've said this before in this reading, about not just the what, but the why. This is where rules become law, become pattern, become regurgitation, rather than actual harmony or synthesis or balance or justice. This is what's frustrating fucking Libra. Got it. Got it. It all ties together, truly. But let me not be too hard, right? In being able to just ask that question. But why? But why? Fulfillment awaits on the other side, where the mind is able to open, to expand, where many doors open, where because of that, many doors open and steam relieves, the smoke clears, when we cook too high of a temperature, when we burn the oil and we're cooking, and smoke fucking goes everywhere, right? What do? We open the door, we open a window, we open space so that the smoke can pass, and so that we can see clearly what it is that we're doing. Ay, 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 Aries. This is understanding the nuances of the fire. This is understanding the inner fire, not just wielding it, not just posturing it, not just provoking, and not just letting it burn right through. This is using it wisely. This is a tool of mastery. Taurus, how are you? Let's see what Cancer season has in store for you. Taurus, Taurus, Taurus. Taurus, Taurus, Taurus. Okay. King of Hearts, Queen of Clubs. Interesting. Because this is kind of like role reversal as far as like what modern Western society assumes of genders, right? 'Cause this is a little soft boy, soft king, and a spitfire of a woman queen, right? Um, so masculine, femme, masculine. However, inverted, both inverted, so kind of at duress with each other, very much projecting, very much like in duress within, and therefore with each other. A man that suppresses and fears his feminine side cannot hold or honor or revere or protect a feminine, let alone a divine feminine or a strong feminine, and a feminine that is, there's nothing wrong with a masculine femme, absolutely. Um, but I think it can also turn into exemplifying the masculinity that we've been subjected to, which is the kind of masculinity we're trying to get away from, that we're trying to deprogram, really. And gosh, I see this in so many ways in real life. Where again, like I said earlier, it's the patriarchy with tits. Where they're talking over, where they won't listen, where new information is a threat to them, where it's just hierarchy and suppression and oppression with better hair. Um, which is not honoring to the masculine or the feminine. Which is not in alignment, which is not in, alchemical union of these energies within the self. It is still about suppression of another and oppression in some way, shape, or form. And, likewise, this is fear of the feminine, not embracement of it. This isn't a man that's so comfortable with his masculinity that feminine doesn't bother him. This is a man that fears snakes, that thinks that colors are gay, that is afraid of perception and of self in so many ways. Both really are. And so there's a lack of capacity to really hone in on the kind of grounding and the kind of nurturing that Taurus is really capable of. And so, realistically, what ways in which has the idealization of ourselves or our shadow side of self been compressed rather than able to elevate or expand or to illuminate other sides of self. This is very much, I think, when people also like identify too deeply with, sun sign or this or that, that they lose the harmony that they're really able to cultivate with other sides of self. This is piousness and self righteousness. And that very much leads to more darkness, more ignorance, more aversion, more hatred, more of the things that we don't want, right? Mars is in Taurus, and that's very much the stubborn, fucking, I know better kind of mentality of Mars in Taurus that it can have. Um, can be very stubborn, can be very heels in the ground, can be very resistant or rejecting of new information or of information that is outside of previously assumed paradigms. Gosh, I've seen this in way too many ways lately. Um, However, how do we facilitate almost like a Freaky Friday swap, right? Because it'll be upright and switched in roles, in which case, the feminine is a fiery illuminating creator, and the masculine is not fearful of femininity, but is able to actually like hold and honor and protect such a thing, even within ourselves. It's our capacity to create or conjure an idea, and our capacity to trust that idea and grow with it and move with it. That's like, in art, they always say, you got to trust the process. You got to trust the process. Very trusting of the process, very passionate about the process. And in that, they're able to trust each other and grow. And, in so many ways, we'll have ideas, but we don't trust that we have the resources. We don't trust that we have the support. We don't trust that we have the, tools available. We don't trust that people will be interested. And realistically, it's not about that. If people aren't interested, that's fine. Let them not be interested. It's not for them. It's not for them. Realistically, like, I think historically, some artists would even say that it's not even for them or for humans. It's for reverence of all of nature and of the cosmos and of spirit. And that's what takes over in creation. And so, what what ways are we able to unionize and to facilitate this collaboration in reverence to something bigger than just our ego, much bigger than just our ego, much bigger than just our simple stimulus desires, much bigger than the material, much bigger than fame or adoration or what have you, even the ways in which we move wanting respect. Don't move like you need it. Move like you are it. And that is also, in respecting that which is around you, life that's around you, creation that's around you, idea that's around you. Not the toxic masculinity of like commanding respect because I said so. No, move like you respect things that are around you and people will respect you back. Move like you respect the earth, and people will be floored by the relationship that they see, by the luminosity that they see, that they'll have no choice but to respect you. This is the key to my masculinity and also my femininity. I move like an alchemical androgen, and it floors people, and it also elevates them in ways that allows them more freedom of sight and freedom of feeling. Or so I've been told. Or so I've been told. Um, but consider this. And something that I've told friends of mine, even, that has led to beautiful, beautiful connection and intimacy and growth in their life is, maybe you identify with one versus the other, and you reject the capacity to be the other. Like, women really just want to, cis women really just want to be cis women and don't want to feel like they have to step into their masculinity to be safe in the world. And, men really want to feel respected and honored as men without having to, you know, without having to feel like they're challenging or questioning that, um, so to speak. And what I told a friend of mine once upon a time was to make a list of all the ideal characteristics of their ideal partner and then to start living in that way. And that's not to say, like, now they're living as a man. That is to say that all of those characteristics were energetic frequencies that then they were putting out. It's not that they were posturing as a man or woman. It's that they were reliable. It's that they were consistent. It's that they were creative. It's that they honored and protected their creations and, trusted themselves and weren't afraid of themselves. And that frequency put out the strong capacity for feminine creation that they had, that therefore attracted the divine masculine, the, you know, beautiful counterpart that was very much like just energetically aligned in the levels in which they wanted to elevate their life. And great things have happened since. I'm not Cupid, but I'm Cupid, eh? But it seems counterintuitive, but it's much more about the frequency and the frequency of your attraction. And when we suppress or repress, or when we posture and oppress, we are not attracting that which we want, and so it becomes exhausting. And we find ourselves in these cyclical patterns of like attracting the same bullshit we're trying to get away from. So don't do that. So don't do that. Um, and realistically, again, responsible cultivation of fire in the body, and not rushing through, and likewise not rushing through the memory because you miss the details of where it is these things are actually able to connect. For sure. Both of those energies are like never able to sync up. Like couples that'll like schedule sex or don't have sex ever because they're just like basically living their own independent lives and just happen to like live in the same house or sleep in the same bed. That's not what we want. That's not what we want. That's not intimacy. That's not connection. But when we're able to facilitate more of that paradigm within us, then we are able to create more space for that paradigm around us, and therefore not miss opportunities, golden opportunities to connect. Gemini. Hello, dear twins. Twin nature, neither negative nor positive, but a synthesis of the two. Neither this nor that, but the space in between. Not on the fence or choosing sides, but perhaps more of a bird's eye view. Or a whole new tunnel in between. Gemini, Gemini, Gemini. Hmm. Oh, oh, okay. Seven of Hearts, inverted. Jack of Hearts, upright. Hmm. seven, a golden illusion of, not illusion, the golden luminous, the golden luminosity of belief, and the ways in which that opens our sights to more of which we want to see. Maybe this is grappling with, like, ideas of optimism or pessimism, and feeling more grounded perhaps in the pessimism, but finding that that constricts opportunities, or feeling disingenuous in optimism and therefore being pessimistic and constricting opportunities. When optimism is more so about our creativity with the stories that we have the parts to play with, rather than, toxic positivity, and, closing the mind to that which doesn't necessarily fit that narrative. The Jack of Hearts is a whimsical storyteller. Consider, like, the role of the jester. Uh, you know, Carried pertinent information, carried necessary information, but conveyed it in such a way that it was something people were willing to listen to or to entertain. Like comedians, for instance. And it's funny because this conversation has come up recently. But like comedians, for instance, the best comedians, they tell a story, and it's usually a story that, offers us some sort of, introspective illumination about ourselves, or teaches us something about the world. Like, what is it? Sammy Obeid is a Palestinian comedian, and very much opens the eyes of the people that witness him. And I think is very, very integral for the ways in which we're able to understand what exactly is going on politically. Troy Bond, also favorite comic of mine, and I've known for a while. When I first started totally following his work, I was like, this man is not obtuse for the sake of being obtuse. He's not, shock and awe for the sake of being shock and awe. It's more so to shake you where you stand, and to then facilitate where we can more perfectly align. Especially as a mixed comic, he jokes, or has joked, that, he's here to incite race wars. But in reality, I think because of the way he constructs his shows and his jokes, it is much more about unity. It is much more about bonding. It is much more about understanding. And outside of the sort of pigeonholed paradigms that we've been given in one idea, an identity or idea or another. And that is this energy. I love this energy. I love Troy Bond, obviously. A little bit of a celebrity crush. But with that, consider those roles. They aren't just there to make a fool of themselves. They are there to teach, but to teach in a way that will make people listen. They are people, and maybe not even to teach, but to question, to challenge, and allow us to be our own teachers. Quite honestly, I think that's absolutely Dave Chappelle's deal. And as a queer and trans person, I do not think Dave Chappelle is transphobic, because I actually finished that stand-up special, and 100%, what a beautiful social experiment. Anybody I know that does think Dave Chappelle is transphobic has never actually finished that joke. So let that sink in, truly. But the ways in which I think he cyclically constructs his jokes is, with a moral that requires us to see the hypocrisy within ourselves. And that's truly what happened. And yet again, social experiment. When people tell on themselves, essentially, to me, when they express that kind of ideology, or they express that, they're on one side or another of it, um, is really because they fail to introspect. They fail to uh, see the hypocrisy within themselves, and so they perpetuate it. And so they perpetuate it. And that is the beautiful thing that you can illustrate with a good story, with a good storyline, with a moral, with a roundabout humor. And that's an ability to entertain seeing things in a new way. So many comedians too will state very clearly that, like, these are jokes. This is not necessarily like me confessing all of my beliefs to you. Or, comedians, I think it was Amber Autry that was like, the sort of like he nuance of like, did that really happen, or is that just a story? Did they embellish this story, or is this like to the T? And that's kind of the like beautiful trick up their sleeves, right? And their ability to play with those circumstances and to play with your perception of those circumstances and those details. The Seven of Hearts wants you to believe in your potentiality for that, wants you to believe in the potentiality for others to even see through that without you having to necessarily lead them through. Interesting, because I love this and I need this. Not because I underestimate myself, or I underestimate because I underestimate other people, maybe both, really. Um, because we can create not diversions, not lines in the sand, but you know how you can go hiking and you almost see where people have gone off trail before without it necessarily being like a designated path, like that. It's the illusion of possibility that really opens up curiosity. And it is not just leading a horse to water, it is not just forcing it to drink, it is not, you know, teaching necessarily in the ways that we have been taught before. And that requires some introspection and requires some humbling in our own, to be able to shift in the ways that we teach, to be able to shift in the ways that we communicate, because not everybody communicates in the same way. And I absolutely humble myself in that experience whenever I can, where if it's like, annoyance or disagreement, annoyance is just an opportunity for me to communicate my boundaries more efficiently. It's an opportunity for me to step up and be like, whoa, I don't like that. Can we not do that, please? And likewise, frustration in communication. It's an opportunity for me to figure out how it is that I'm communicating, and how it is I can better communicate for the way this person is open or available to learning at that time, like any good teacher, rather than the ones that gave up on us or called us stupid or sent us out of class for questioning whatever nonsense they were fucking spewing out. Those weren't the good teachers. Those weren't the teachers that were in it for, you know, knowledge or for growth of community or for future generations. And this is our responsibility toward future generations, toward access of information for not just our children or grandchildren, but for, many of us without children ourselves, but for children in general, for my best friend's kid, for my best friend's sister's kids, for kids that I'll never meet that I don't know, but that I still very much hold great pain and reverence for, and aim to serve and protect in some way, shape, or form. And that is the union between both sides of Gemini. Much like this last reading, the masculine and the feminine, when they come together and are able to actually, co-parent and facilitate, rather than like what we often see in divorce is parents will split and then they'll sort of tit for tat each other, taking whacks at each other, and fail to recognize that what really is happening is they're not hurting each other, they're hurting the child. And I think in so many ways, we can expand that. But the child is an idea, or the child is a belief, or the child is, a goal of sorts. And the ways in which we, tit for tat our shadow self and our light self, our masculine self and our feminine self, and sacrifice balance. Um, when we can, come together, co-parent, so to speak, and facilitate the best experience we can, and absolutely there's kids who have divorced parents that are like, yeah, but they were both really good to me, and they did their best to like not put me in the middle and made sure that I didn't think it was my fault and da 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 da. That was unheard of in my lifetime and in my generation, but it is a beautiful thing um that there is seeds of growth in the ways in which we are able to heal ourselves for the benefit of following generations. Damn, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful send off because I hope that takes all of this, like, but this reading's about me and expands it beyond belief. Because it's never just about you or me. It is about all of the space in between and the connections that we make. Wow, 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 wow. I hope that makes you feel limitless and invincible and immortal, really, because that is legacy. That is generational wealth beyond the tangible, beyond the material, but in a deeply felt sense. You will see it. You will see it like lightning strikes. You will feel it and you will see it. All right, my loves. That is the totality of it, the full cycle of harmony is every sign, all signs. Like I said before, if you're going to just look at your sun, your moon, and your rising, I promise you that's not going to do you too well, my friend. If you are, what's the antipode? What's the opposite? What lies directly opposition your sun? That has something to tell you too. And your Mars and Venus, where they are independently and how they relate, 100% has been a reoccurring theme in this. And so consider what that relationship is and how that carries energy and movement and growth, much like we just talked about. And if you are not a Cancer, consider taking a look at other Cycle of Harmonies readings and seeing if your sign has already been done. I think we've got a couple more before we're fully done with 12 signs. And then we will be able to expand that and be able to read just indigenous astrology proper. Party on, party on. With that, mwah, mwah. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for awareness. Thank you for your focus and your openness utmost. Um, I only hope that it sparked a fire in you and allowed for that illumination to grow, for your fire to be truly alive and a growing thing. With that, my friends, I'll see you next time.